Hi, everyone, and welcome back to In Her Element. I am so glad that you're here today. In today's episode, I want to start with a question. Have you ever achieved exactly what you were supposed to achieve and still feel like you're living in translation? Maybe you're the first in your family to get a degree, but explaining your job to your parents feels like speaking a very different language. Maybe you've built the life your family sacrificed for, but you still feel like you're code switching between worlds multiple times a day. And maybe you've succeeded by every external measure, and somehow it still doesn't feel like home. And if any of that resonates with you, this episode is for you. Because today we are talking about the immigrant paradox, the first generation paradox, the paradox of anyone who's ever had to straddle two worlds, two value systems, and two definitions of success, and felt like they belong fully to neither. We are going to talk about what it actually feels like to carry one world while building another, to honor your parents' dreams while pursuing your own, to be accomplished and still feel like you're explaining yourself constantly. And here's what I want you to know upfront. If you have ever felt this way, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not broken. The research actually backs that up, what we are experiencing. And we're going to be talking about that too. So, settle in. Let's have an honest conversation about something that we don't talk enough about. So, to begin, let me paint a picture that might feel familiar. You are at a professional event. Let's say it's a networking reception, a conference, or even a department gathering. You're dressed appropriately, you're making small talk, and someone asks about your background, and you tell them your story, the abbreviated professional version. And they respond with some version of, wow, that's so impressive. You must be so proud. And you smile, you say thank you, and you say something gracious and humble. But underneath, there's this gap, this this chasm between how they're seeing you and how you're experiencing yourself. Because they see courage and you feel caught between two versions of success that don't speak the same language. They see an interesting trajectory and you feel like you're performing competence while still figuring out where you belong. They see accomplishment and you feel the weight of unspoken questions from family back home. When will you be settled? When will this make sense? When are you coming back? I had one of those moments recently. Actually, not recently. This was a couple of years ago, in the second year of my PhD program, at a department event. A professor I respected said to me, leaving medicine to start over, that must have taken so much courage. And I thought, courage? Or am I just living the gap between who I was supposed to be and who I'm becoming? Because here's the thing about being an immigrant, a first gen professional, or anyone who's navigating between these worlds, you learn to perform, to code switch, and not just in language or accent, but in entire value systems. At work, you are this confident professional, the one who speaks up in meetings, challenges assumptions, and takes up space. But with family, you're still explaining your choices, still justifying decisions that made perfect sense in one context but feel foreign in another. And if you have a partner or close friends who witness both versions of you, they see the exhaustion. They see that you switch between worlds, sometimes within the same hour. And here's what nobody tells you about code switching. It's not just cognitive, it's emotional and honestly, it's spiritual even. Because you start to wonder, which version is the real me? Am I performing for my professional world or am I performing for my family? And where is the authentic self underneath all this translation? This is the immigrant paradox. And if you are living in it, you know exactly what I mean. So let's talk about what's actually happening here because this just isn't in our heads. Actually, there is a term in psychology for what many of us experience, and it's called bicultural identity integration. It's the process of integrating two cultural identities into a cohesive sense of self. And here's what the research shows. People who successfully integrate their bicultural identities rather than compartmentalizing them or rejecting one for the other actually have better mental health outcomes, higher self esteem, and greater life satisfaction. But here's the catch, that integration is hard work because it requires what researchers call cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift between cultural frames depending on context. And while that flexibility can be tremendous strength, it comes with real costs. Think about what this looks like in practice. In a professional setting, you've learned to speak directly, to be assertive, to question authority, because in many Western academic and corporate contexts, that's what's valued. You know, participation, individual contribution, speaking up when you're not entirely certain. But maybe you grew up in a culture that respects where, but maybe you grew up in a respect for hierarchy is paramount, where you don't speak unless you're sure you're right, where the collective, family, community always comes before the individual. So when someone in a meeting asks, what do you think? There's the split second where two voices speak in your head. One says, speak up, your perspective matters here. And the other says, are you sure? There are more senior people in this room. Who are you to speak? And you have learned to silence the second voice outwardly. You have learned to perform confidence even when you feel uncertain. And this, my friend, is code switching. And research shows that it's not just about language, it's about switching your entire operating systems multiple times a day. Now, a 2018 study published in the Journal of Cross Cultural Psychology found that bicultural individuals engage in what they call frame switching, shifting between different cultural frameworks depending on social context. The study found that while this flexibility can be adaptive, it also requires a significant cognitive resources. Now, in translation, what does that mean? It's exhausting. And that exhaustion is real, measurable, and documented. So, when you're at work, you might be the assertive professional, the one who speaks up, challenges data, and asks, why not? And when you're with family, whether it's a phone call across continents or a family gathering, you might become someone slightly different, more differential, more focused on a collective harmony, more aware of hierarchies and obligations. And both these versions are authentic. Both are you, but they don't always fit together neatly. And the data confirms that we are all what we already know in our bones. This is real. What we are experiencing isn't a personal weakness or confusion. It's a documented phenomena with measurable effects. Now, let me introduce you to another term that might make you feel seen. And I've also talked about it in my previous episode, cultural taxation. Now, this is the invisible labor that people of color, immigrants, and marginalized groups perform in professional settings. It's being the one who has to educate others about your culture, being asked to represent your entire community, code switching, translating, explaining, and justifying your presence in spaces that weren't designed for you. A 2019 study in the Journal of Diversity in Higher Education found that faculty of color, and particularly women of color, spend significantly more time on this invisible labor than their white counterparts. Labor that goes largely unrecognized and unrewarded in promotion and tenure decisions. Think about what this looks like. Maybe you're in a meeting and someone makes a casual, ignorant comment about those communities. You have to decide in that moment, do I let it go? Do I educate? Or how do I correct this without making it awkward? Without being seen as the diversity police. Or maybe you're the only person of color in a room and someone assumes you are there in a support role and not as a colleague or a leader. Or maybe you have to constantly explain why certain perspectives matter, why representation isn't just a checkbox, and why the issues you care about are actually critical. This is cultural taxation, and it accumulates day after day, meeting after meeting, and interaction after interaction. Research shows that cultural taxation contributes significantly to burnout, particularly among women of color in academia and professional settings. It's emotional labor, it's cognitive labor, and most of the time, it's invisible to the people who don't have to perform it. And if you have ever felt exhausted by constant explaining, translating, proving yourself in spaces that weren't designed for you, that's not you being weak or overly sensitive. That's you carrying an additional burden that the research confirms is real. Now, let's talk about something even more personal: the weight of expectations. For many of us who are immigrants, first generation, or anyone whose family has made significant sacrifices for our opportunities, we are not just ourselves, we are the return on investment. We are the reason it was all worth it. Now, think about what that means. Every sacrifice your parents or family made, the hard work, the financial strain, the distance from their own parents, the cultural dislocation, all of it gets measured against your success. Your achievements become their vindication. Your stability becomes proof that they made the right choices. So when you pivot, when you choose uncertainty over security, when you say, I need to choose purpose over comfort, it can feel like betrayal, even when it's not, even when they say, never say that explicitly. A 2020 study that was done on South Asian immigrants in North America found that intergenerational conflict around career choices and life decisions is one of the strongest predictors of acculturation stress. Now, the study identified what they call achievement guilt, the psychological burden of being responsible for validating your parents' sacrifice through your success. And let me be very specific about what this looks like for many of us. In one cultural framework, maybe the one you grew up in, success looks like stability, a prestigious career with a clear trajectory, financial security, the ability to support your parents when they get older, marriage and children, and bringing honor to the family name. Success is collective. It's about the family unit, not the individual. It's about duty, responsibility, and sacrifice. But in another cultural framework, maybe the one you are navigating now, success is framed differently. It's about alignment between your values and your work, impact, the freedom to pursue questions that matter to you, personal fulfillment, and living authentically. And here the success is individual. It's about being true to yourself. Now, these aren't just different definitions, they are completely different philosophies of what makes a life worth living. And when you are straddling both worlds, you're constantly navigating this tension. Maybe you left a stable career to pursue something more meaningful. Maybe you're still in school when your family expected you to be established by now. Maybe you chose a field they don't quite understand. And maybe you're building a life that looks nothing like what they imagined for you. And the conversations or non conversations around this can be painful. You have already made it. Why take this risk? When will you be settled? Why? We just want you to have security. And how do you explain to someone who sees stability as success that you need purpose? How do you say, I know you want certainty for me, but I need meaning without sounding ungrateful? And research on immigrant families shows that these intergenerational tensions aren't about love or caring less. They are about fundamentally different frameworks that are shaped by different experiences. Your parents' or family's definition of success was often shaped by scarcity, survival, limited options. They wanted security for you because they experienced insecurity. Your definition might be shaped by different possibilities, different values, and different contexts. And here's the really complicated part about this: both are valid, both come from love, and both are shaped by real experiences or real concerns. But that doesn't make them easier to reconcile. Many of us carry what researchers call the psychological weight of feeling responsible for our parents' well being and happiness, particularly when we have made choices that they don't fully understand. You might feel guilt when you're explaining your work to family and you see polite confusion on their faces. They nod, they say they are proud, but you can tell that they don't really understand why this matters to you. You might hear the unspoken questions like, when will you be done? When will this make sense to us? When are you coming back? And you might not have neat answers to those questions. Here's what I am learning and what the research on bicultural identity development supports. You can hold multiple truths simultaneously. Your family's dreams for you were born of love and sacrifice, and you get to dream your own dreams. Their definition of success was shaped by their reality, and your definition can be shaped by yours. You can honor what they wanted for you and still choose something different. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about integration, about finding ways to hold both, honor both, even when it's uncomfortable. Now, let's talk about something else many of us experience: imposter syndrome. That nagging feeling that you don't really belong, that you're not quite qualified, that eventually someone will figure out you don't deserve to be in this room, at this table, and in this position. A 2020 study established in the Journal of Career Development found that women of color in STEM fields and academia report imposter feelings at significantly higher rates than their white counterparts. But here's what's crucial: the study found that these feelings aren't just about individual self doubt or personal insecurity. They are rational response to institutional barriers and bias. Now think about it. When you are consistently the only person who looks like you in professional spaces, when your accent is commented on, when your credentials are questioned more than others, when you have to work twice as hard to be seen as half as competent, feeling like an imposter isn't a personal failing. It's a logical response to an environment that sends you subtle and sometimes not so subtle messages that you don't belong. The researchers call this contextual imposter syndrome. It's not rooted in your actual competence or qualifications. It's rooted in being in spaces that weren't designed for people like us. So if you've ever felt this way, understand that it's not just you. It's not that you're not good enough. That it's that you're navigating systems that weren't built with you in mind. And that's exhausting in a very different way. A 2021 meta analysis on workplace belonging found that employees from underrepresented backgrounds spent significantly more cognitive resources monitoring the environment for signals of acceptance or rejection. They are constantly asking, do I belong here? Am I safe here? Can I be myself here? That constant vigilance, it's depleting. It takes energy away from actually doing your work, from being creative, from taking risks. And the data tells us this isn't personal weakness, this is actually structural, systemic in nature. And knowing that, really understanding that, can be both validating and infuriating at the same time. Now, let's talk about what many of us have to unlearn when we are navigating between these worlds. Because it's not just about learning new cultural norms or professional expectations, it's about unlearning old ones. And that's often harder than anyone tells you. For many women, especially, this means unlearning patriarchal expectations that we have absorbed while growing up. Maybe it's the idea that women exist primarily to support, serve, and sacrifice, that our needs come last, that speaking up for ourselves is selfish, and that ambition is unbecoming. For eldest daughters, particularly in certain cultures, there's what researchers now call the eldest daughter syndrome. And in another study that was published in International Journal of Psychology, identified this pattern that eldest daughters collectively in a collectivist culture often develop a very deep rooted belief that love is earned through responsibility. That if you're not taking care of everyone, if you're not holding everything together, if you're not being strong for everyone else, then you're failing at your most fundamental role. In many cultures, the eldest daughter carries invisible weight. You are the translator, not just of language, but of everything: culture, expectations, and family dynamics. You are the bridge between your parents and younger siblings, the ones who are supposed to have it all figured out, the one who leads by example, and the one who never complains because you are setting the standard. And if you are the eldest daughter who has also navigated immigration or significant cultural transitions, that weight multiplies exponentially because now you're also the bridge between countries, between value systems, and between the world your family knows and the one that you are trying to build. Many of us have spent our lives equating love with responsibility. If our parents needed something, we provided it. If our family had a problem, we tried to solve it. If there was a burden to carry, we carried it, knowingly or unknowingly. Because that's what love looked like. That's what being a good daughter, a good child meant. But here's what I am learning, and also what research on boundary setting and mental health confirms: love doesn't require self abandonment. Being a good daughter or son doesn't mean having no boundaries. Honoring your family doesn't mean dishonoring yourself. Something that I read on acculturation and mental health said that second generation immigrants who were able to maintain cultural connections while also establishing healthy boundaries reported significantly lower rates of anxiety and depression. And in other words, you can honor your roots and grow in your own direction. You can respect where you came from and build something different. You don't have to choose between being true to your culture and being true to yourself. And belonging, real belonging, doesn't mean contorting yourself into someone else's vision of who you should be. It means finding or creating spaces where you can be fully yourself in all your complexity and contradiction. This is hard work. Unlearning is always harder than learning, but it's also necessary work. If you want to build lives that feel authentic, not just acceptable, we have to do this work. Let's go deeper into the research on code switching because understanding this can actually help explain why we feel so exhausted. A 2019 study in the Harvard Business Review analyzed code switching among professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. And they found that code switching, whether be it linguistic, behavioral, or cultural, requires what psychologists call self regulation resources. Now, basically, every time you code switch, you're using mental energy. You're monitoring yourself, adjusting your language, modifying your behavior, calibrating your presentation, and those resources are finite. And the study also found that professionals who code switch regularly report higher levels of emotional exhaustion and burnout. Not because they are any less resilient, but because they're carrying an additional cognitive load that others don't have to carry. And think about what this looks like in your daily life. Maybe you modify your accent in professional settings. You become more formal, more reserved. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny to fit in. Maybe you downplay your credentials to seem less threatening, or you even overemphasize them to prove you belong. Maybe you carefully calibrate how much of your culture to share, how much to explain, and how much to keep private. Every single one of these adjustments requires decision making, monitoring, energy. And when you're doing this multiple times a day, every day for years, it adds up. Another study that was published in 2020 in the Journal of Applied Psychology found that employees who code switch spend approximately 60% more cognitive resources during workplace interactions compared to those who don't have to. 60% more. That's not a small difference. That's actually quite significant. And here's what's important to understand: this doesn't mean that code switching is bad or that we should stop doing it. For many of us, it's necessary survival strategy. It's how we navigate spaces that weren't designed for us. But we need to acknowledge the cost. We need to recognize that if you're exhausted, if you feel drained after social interactions, if you need more downtime than others seem to need, it's not because you're weak or you're antisocial. It's because you're working harder just to exist in those spaces. And the research actually validates that we already know that this is real, this is measurable, and this is not in your head. And now I want to connect all of this to something that might seem unrelated at first, but I promise you it's not: environmental justice. Because here's what environmental justice shows us: immigrant communities, communities of color, low income communities, they bear a disproportionate burden of environmental hazards. They are more likely to live near pollution sources, less likely to have access to green space and clean air, and more vulnerable to health impacts of climate change. Now, according to a 2021 EPA report, communities of colors are exposed to 35% more particulate pollution than white communities, even when controlling for income. Immigrant communities face even higher disparities in environmental exposure. And here's why this matters to our conversation about belonging. The same systems that make immigrant identity complicated, the systems of power, systems of exclusion, systems that decide who belongs and who doesn't, those are the exact same systems that determine who gets exposed to environmental toxins and who gets protected. The same systems that make us feel like we have to code switch to belong are the same systems that decide whose neighborhoods gets pollution and whose don't, whose voices get heard in decision making, whose bodies matter, and whose communities get resources. Research on environmental justice isn't separate from research on belonging. It's the same question asked in different ways: whose lives are valued, who gets to be safe, and who gets to thrive. When you understand what it's like to navigate systems that weren't designed for you, when you know what it's like to have to prove your worth, to justify your presence, and to translate yourself constantly, you understand viscerally what environmental injustice looks like. Because environmental injustice is about the same thing: some people's lives being valued less than others. And the American Journal of Public Health found that when research teams include people from communities they are studying, when leadership reflects diversity of lived experiences, and the quality of environmental health research improves dramatically. The questions asked are more nuanced, the interpretations are more accurate. The questions asked are more nuanced, the interpretations are more accurate, and the solutions are more culturally responsive and actually implementable. In other words, our lived experience of navigating between worlds, of understanding complexity, of seeing what others miss, that's not incidental to doing good work, actually essential. Your multiple identities, your ability to navigate different cultural worlds, your understanding of what it's like to be marginalized aren't just weaknesses. These are exactly what the world needs right now. Whether you're doing environmental work, education, healthcare, tech, art, whatever, the perspective you bring from living between worlds, from understanding complexity, from knowing what exclusion feels like, that matters. So let's talk about what integration actually looks like, because I think this is where we find the path forward. Integration is not assimilation. Assimilation says erase one identity to adopt another, become more like the dominant culture, minimize your difference. Integration says all parts of you get to exist simultaneously. Your multiple identities can enrich each other rather than compete. Research on bicultural development shows that integration, that is holding both identities as valuable and complementary, leads to better psychological outcomes than assimilation, separation, or marginalization. A landmark 2018 study in the psychological science found that bicultural individuals who successfully integrate the identities report higher life satisfaction, better mental health, and greater creativity than those who try to suppress or separate their identity. So, what does this integration look like in practice? It means you can honor both your roots and your growth. You can respect your parents' sacrifices while also making different choices. You can carry your culture with you while also adapting to the new context. It means recognizing that code switching isn't betrayal, it's actually an expansion of yourself. It's proof that you're capable of holding complexity of speaking multiple languages and of navigating multiple worlds. It means understanding that you don't have to choose. You are not too Indian for American spaces and too American for Indian spaces. You are not too academic for your family or too traditional for your peers. You are bicultural, multicultural, and fluent in complexity. And that's not a deficit. That's not something to fix or overcome. That's a perspective, a gift, a form of wisdom that only comes from living in the in between. Now, I want to be very clear. And this doesn't mean it's easy. This doesn't mean that the tension suddenly disappears. This doesn't mean everyone will understand. What it means is that you get to define success for yourself. You get to decide what belonging looks like. You get to be the author of your own story, even while honoring the chapters that came before you. The research supports this. Your experiences validate this. You are not alone in this. So let me leave you with some questions to sit with. What would it mean to honor both your roots and your growth without choosing sides? What would it look like to be fully yourself? All your identities, all your complexities, all your contradictions without apology. What if the fact that you don't quite fit anywhere means you get to create your own belonging? These aren't rhetorical questions. These are the questions that I'm living with, the questions we are all navigating. And here's what I want you to know. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in these stories, if you've ever felt caught between cultures, between expectations, between who you were and who you're becoming, you're not alone. The research confirms what we know in our bones, that this is real, this is documented, and this is not in your head. You are not lost, you are not confused, you are not failing. You are actually navigating complexity that most people never have to face. You're holding multiple truths simultaneously. You're building bridges between worlds. And that's not a weakness, that's actually strength. That's not confusion, that's a lot of wisdom. Maybe the world needs more people who can hold complexity, who can translate between cultures, who can see multiple perspectives, who understand that belonging isn't about fitting into pre existing boxes. It's about creating spaces where all of you can exist. Maybe the immigrant paradox, the first generation paradox, the paradox of living between worlds, maybe that's not a problem to solve. Maybe it's a reality to live fully, honestly, and bravely. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being a part of this community where we tell these truths. Next week, we're going to talk about what happens when your body starts keeping score, when the pace you've been maintaining becomes unsustainable, when burnout isn't just about being tired, it's your body saying no more. Until then, be gentle with yourself, honor your complexity, and remember, you are exactly where you need to be. This is In Her Element. I'm Swati, and I'll see you next week.